Eeny, meeny, miny, gain, catch a console by the gain. If it hollers, let it tame. Eeny, meeny, miny, gain. My mother said, pick the perfect one, and you are it. Guess that means you, big boy. I want to be clear up front, this is not an entirely fair comparison. If you take these two audio recording consoles, the RØDECaster PRO II and the TASCAM Mixcast 4, clearly the RØDECaster PRO II is the more versatile and ultimately the better device from the two. Although, you might actually be surprised at the end, because the TASCAM Mixcast 4, albeit it is indeed much less flexible, yet still it has some features that you might need more than the flexibility of the RØDECaster PRO II. So let's just see what their differences are, what their similarities are, and what each one has that the other one doesn't. Both have 4 mic inputs. On the RØDECaster PRO II they double as line inputs. On the Mixcast 4, while it looks like they are line inputs too, they're not. They can receive 1/4 inch or 6.35mm mic inputs, but to counteract it, the Mixcast 4 has dedicated extra line inputs in the back on top of the 4 mic inputs. Plus there is a TRRS port on the front of the device. Not only can you plug a pair of headphones in there, more conveniently pointing towards you, just like on the original RØDECaster Pro, which the RØDECaster PRO II does not have anymore, but since it is a TRRS port, you can actually use standard phone headsets for it and use it as a mic and headphone input at the same time. It takes over the mic 1 input and carries the same signal as headphone 1. Both devices give you plenty of gain. The TASCAM Mixcast 4 has 66.5 decibel, while the RØDECaster PRO II has 75 decibel gain. Not only does the RØDECaster PRO II have roughly 10 decibel more gain, it is also rated cleaner as per specs. What it means in practice, here's the noise you hear when you are driving the SM7B at 66.5 decibels of gain on the RØDECaster PRO II and on the TASCAM Mixcast 4. Both have physical faders. The RØDECaster PRO II has 6, while the Mixcast 4 has 8, but the Mixcast 4 is fixed in terms of what channels they control, whereas the RØDECaster PRO II is fully customizable. The faders can be assigned to control any input channel, of which there are, by the way, altogether 9 on the RØDECaster PRO II, whereas on the Mixcast 4, only 8. But those 8 have all their dedicated, predefined fader, whether you need them or not. While on the RØDECaster PRO II, having only 6 physical faders, the other 3 channels are to be controlled by virtual faders on the screen. The advantage here is that realistically, in 90% of the cases, you probably don't need more than 6 at your fingertips that you need to adjust all the time, and you can cherry pick which channels you need and to which fader you assign them to. Both have large color touchscreens. That on the RØDECaster PRO II is a 1/2 inch bigger, 5.5 inch versus 5 inch on the Mixcast 4, and it's also tilted, plus much more responsive, very much like a mobile phone screen, while the Mixcast 4 screen is flat, which makes the device a tiny bit flatter too, but it is noticeably less responsive and less ergonomic. The RØDECaster PRO II even has a rotary dial that further enhances its ergonomic handling. Built-in mix minus for recording remote guests, the Mixcast 4 has 3, the USB, the Bluetooth, and the 3.5mm smartphone input, versus on the RØDECaster PRO II, you have Bluetooth, USB 1, USB 1 chat, and USB 2, which you can use for wired phone connection as well. Not only that, but you can fully customize what goes out from these channels, so not only can they do mix minus, which is excluding the same channel being outputted to avoid feedback loop, but you can exclude any other channel, which becomes very useful, for instance, when you are monitoring via Bluetooth. See my video about how to use your AirPods with the RØDECaster PRO II for online calls, or another example would be if you want to exclude the game sound from the chat. Monitoring via Bluetooth is, by the way, not possible on the Mixcast 4 at all, which brings me to USB ports. Both have them, but the RØDECaster PRO II has 2, and one of them, which is the USB 1 channel, natively offers 2 audio channels simultaneously on your computer. You can connect it to 2 computers at the same time, which is not an option on the Mixcast 4, but you can even plug both USBs into the same computer for even more versatility. And you can even use either of the USB ports to plug in a USB drive and record to it, or save settings to it, which makes transferring your settings to another RØDECaster Pro II incredibly easy. Not the most commonly used feature, but those who need it, they need it badly. The RØDECaster Pro II is set to receive a firmware update that will allow to use USB mics on these ports, but that feature is not yet available, so for this comparison it doesn't count. Staying with USB, the RØDECaster Pro II is USB powered, while the Mixcast 4 has its own charger. Nonetheless, the USB power adapter of the original RØDECaster Pro can power the TASCAM Mixcast 4 II. Moreover, you can screw in and lock the Mixcast 4's power, which you cannot do with the USB-C power port on the RØDECaster Pro II. Not a big deal, but less of a peace of mind a little bit. Then, and this is a big one, SoundPads, or as Rode calls them on the RØDECaster Pro II, SmartPads. Give credit for credit is due. The Mixcast 4 was the first to display the SmartPads with names on the screen, which was a quality of life improvement for all who has ever used SoundPads blindly. And while the RØDECaster Pro II luckily also has this now, and some more, like displaying where it is with the playback, if you press them and play a sound on it, it is less readable for now. If Rode would allow for custom SoundPad icons, which they have already alluded to in their survey about the upcoming features, you will be able to make them more readable, but for now it's just a little too small. But at least you can rename them on the device, which you cannot do on the Mixcast 4. However, Tascam still has it ergonomically on a better place, right next to the SoundPads, while on the RØDECaster Pro II is shifted a little bit with the screen to the side, actually to the middle. And while they can all do similar tricks with the pads, Rode is just more advanced. I won't go much into MIDI, but fact is that this can be a game changer for many who use it. Not only can you teach these pads to switch screens in OBS, for instance, or any other MIDI function in your digital audio workstation, but you can program the record start button to start recording in your DAW, and then the faders to control the faders in the DAW too. Not on the Mixcast 4 as of now though. The next thing you can set the RØDECaster Pro II SoundPads to is voice effects. And you can also do that with the Mixcast 4, but boy, there's a world of difference in them. On the Mixcast 4, you have quite tough limitations even after the last firmware update, which made the usage of effects somewhat more versatile. You can set any SoundPad to trigger one of the 2 effects available to you on any of the 4 mic channels. And you can even set the pad to latch mode so you don't have to have it pressed all the time while you want to apply the effect. You can also decide which mic channel or mic channels should the effect be applied to once you press the pad, but here comes the limitation. You can only apply a single effect, whether pitch shift or voice changer, as they call it, or reverb, and this effect will be applied to all mic channels where you allowed them to. You cannot have a different effect set up to each mic channel. It will always be the same effect applied the same way on all mic channels that you allow it to. Whereas in the RØDECaster Pro II, you have first of all 6 effects: pitch shift, delay, reverb, megaphone, robots in all sizes, monster, all the fun you want. And not only can you set up whatever effect you want on whichever mic channel, sadly also here you can apply effects only to the mic channels, but you can stack 4 out of the 6 effects on each other as you feel like. You can combine pitch shift, reverb, and delay with one of the 3 voice changers. Fact is though that however you set up a particular effect, it will be also there applied the same way on all mic channels that you switch it on for. But while on the Mixcast 4, it does not make any sense to set up more than one SoundPad to trigger effects, as both pads will do the same thing, on the RØDECaster Pro II, you can have as many SoundPads assigned to different effects and different mic channels as you want. Still also here applies that if you set up an effect for a mic channel and you switch it on for another mic channel, it will be the same effect settings on both. But still, there is an enormous difference in the versatility. I don't necessarily see a huge use case for it, but if you play guitar, you just might. Or in whatever your situation is where you want this kind of freedom. Let's see about voice processing. The Mixcast 4 has compressor, noise gate, bass boost, treble boost, and de-esser. All of them are fully manually adjustable. And you have all this on the RØDECaster Pro II. Only the bass boost and the treble boost are called Big Bottom and Overall Exciter and are more advanced than on the Mixcast 4. You also have granular settings for them and a quite impressive live display on what's happening to the sound while you are talking or singing or doing whatever you are recording. But here you have some more. First, you have a hysteresis setting on the noise gate, which makes it just a touch more usable, also for spoken word. See my video about it. Then you also have panning, which is appealing to musicians in the first place. And you also have a basic 3-band EQ that you can set to your liking. A small trick here, long pressing the gain gives you the Q settings, which defines the width of the slope in the EQ curve, so you can do some EQ sweeping if you want. A further big advantage on the RØDECaster Pro II is that you have all granular settings for a particular effect on a single page, whereas on the Mixcast 4 you sometimes have 2 pages of settings for a single effect, which can be a drama until you discover it. I certainly was one for me, until I've discovered it on the noise gate settings. Plus, if you don't want to be this scientific with your voice processing, you have the VoxLab processor, in which you have 3 easy-to-understand dials: depth, sparkle, and punch, where in layman's terms depth is the bass, sparkle is the air and clarity, and punch is the compression, how much you want that radio broadcast over-processed sound to your voice. On the Mixcast 4 you have 2 or 3 levels, but in this VoxLab you have a much finer dial. And best of all, once you have found the sound that you were looking for, you can save the settings, give them a name, and recall them anytime as presets, let alone the built-in presets for Rhode's own microphones, plus for the Electro Voice RE20 and the Shure SM7B, which is really thoughtful. On top of all this, on the RØDECaster Pro II, you have a master compeller, which is a master compressor, limiter, and leveler. This, or at least the master bus compressor, is dearly missed on the Mixcast 4. Next is Talkback. On the Mixcast 4, you have a dedicated, but single Talkback button to activate this feature to talk to the other participants, so that it won't make it to the recording. While on the RØDECaster Pro II, you can make a dedicated button for it, as you can assign this feature, which Rode calls backchannel, to any SmartPad. In fact, you can assign more than one SmartPad to trigger backchannel communication. Let's say on one you are instructing the remote guest on Bluetooth, and without having to reset the backchannel setup, just create another backchannel SmartPad to talk to another participant, and you can use them simultaneously, so trigger any number of backchannel setups at the same time. And while Talkback is a special feature for Mic 1, on the RØDECaster Pro II you can freely choose to which channels you want to talk outside a recording, apart from USB 1, which is to not accidentally mess up with streamed or recorded audio. On the Mixcast 4, you can only toggle the remote guests, Bluetooth, USB, and the 3.5mm TRRS smartphone channel on and off Talkback. All your present guests with a headphone on will be included all the time, inevitably. On the positive side, you can toggle these on and off even during recording. Also on the RØDECaster Pro II, you have a really clear indication as to whom you are talking to when in backchannel mode. Both lights below the channel fader will light up yellow. Really hard to miss, especially as it is also reflected on the screen, even for the virtual channels. Here you can see how it changes as I switch on another back channel with a second SmartPad. Plus, you can do it manually as well, just by pressing both solo and mute buttons for a channel simultaneously. The RØDECaster Pro II is also slightly better when it comes to how it saves recordings on the SD card. It saves all channels as individual files, albeit it still saves a file for all active channels regardless to whether they have been recorded to or not, but at least it follows your fader setup. Of course, the idea behind it is that being this flexible with the channel setup, you should not even have those channels active which you are not using. But still, it is something where it can be still improved. Whereas the Mixcast 4 saves recordings in a polywave file, just like the original RØDECaster Pro did. But at least you can rename them right after the recording on the device when the recording was finished, which makes it a lot easier to find the right file for the transfer right away. The polywave files are not a huge deal. Yes, the files are a lot larger, but all in all, it's just a small inconvenience. I like the way the RØDECaster Pro II does it better, but it is a pity that you cannot rename them on the device. The other upside with TASCAM is that you can see it as a USB drive if you set it to SD device mode, and with the RØDECaster PRO II, you have to use Rode Central to transfer recordings, rename them, etc. Which brings me to the Accompanion software. TASCAM has its own podcast editor that transfers recording from the Mixcast 4 into it, has preset channels that correspond to the channels on the Mixcast 4, and you can edit the recorded audio to the point that it can be published. It can even use plugins installed on your computer, which is awesome. It's a mini DAW essentially, with specific touches to the Mixcast 4, and it also has a mobile app, so you can easily use it with an iPad or a phone. Rode has Rode Central, with which you can change some settings on the RØDECaster PRO II, albeit one of the appealing characteristics of the RØDECaster PRO II is that most settings you don't need a computer for, or Rode Central, only for transferring recording, as it is not recognized as a drive, and adding sounds to the SmartPads. However, the TASCAM podcast editor is a very liberal software, so you can actually use it as a DAW for the RØDECaster PRO II as well. You just need to set it as the audio interface and set up the channels correctly. But for the Mixcast 4 it has some more features, like when setting up the SoundPads you will have nice touches like you can manipulate the uploaded sounds to a basic level, like with trimming and fade in, fade out. You can also export recordings at the desired loudness level, however, it does not seem to work all that well, while in Rode Central it does, which is a big plus. Just a note, the normalization to LUFS target loudness will only be applied to the stereo mix, not to the individual channel recordings. Also, when editing a multi-track recording, the TASCAM podcast editor still does not display the name of the recording you are editing or you are working on, which is quite ridiculous. And also to the TASCAM podcast editor, you can export the current state of the Mixcast 4, and then you can recall it if for some reason you have lost them or you are updating the device. Still, it's very far from the shows feature on the RØDECaster PRO II. Lastly, color coding and lights. Both consoles use color coding to differentiate channels and headphone dials, but while on both consoles these colors are lit up, on the Mixcast 4 they are fixed, and on the RØDECaster PRO II you can choose whatever color you want for whichever channel or for the headphones. And although it's a subjective opinion, the colors on the RØDECaster PRO II are just nicer. It looks like on the Mixcast 4 they kind of stop differentiating at the mic channels, and then everything apart from the Bluetooth is just amber. They could use the color coding in the TASCAM podcast editor. They are much nicer. On the RØDECaster PRO II they are just nice out of the box. Not to mention that they are fully customizable. You can freely set the colors on both consoles for the SoundPads though. Okay, we all knew that the RØDECaster PRO II is more advanced. That's not a surprise. It needs to justify its higher price tag, and no doubt it does. But there are areas where the Mixcast 4 actually has a slight edge. Now that's a surprise, isn't it? You can't think of any? There are actually 5 such areas. First, ducking. You do have ducking feature on both consoles, but while on the RØDECaster PRO II you have to set a SmartPad to apply ducking, and it's an on-off setting, on the Mixcast 4 you can access it in the channel settings for mic 1 under voice processing. And there comes the surprise, you can manually set up ducking. You can actually decide if you'd want to attenuate the other channels more if you feel like they are still too loud. This is actually quite useful. Second, an extra 3.5mm line output for cameras or anything else really enhances the I/O flexibility and usability. A pity that these hardware features were stripped from the RØDECaster PRO II. Third, SoundPad banks. The RØDECaster PRO II has 8, the Mixcast 4 has 8 plus 1, so 64 versus 72 to the Mixcast 4. But on the RØDECaster PRO II you have color-coded hardware buttons to change them, which is incredibly useful. Fourth, extra line inputs on top of the 4 mic channels. That is, if you don't need the 3.5mm smartphone input. That can be very useful if you don't want to occupy any of the mic input ports and still want to plug in a keyboard, even though these are the only real line inputs, as the combo jacks can only accept mic-level quarter-inch inputs, while on the RØDECaster PRO II, these are true combo inputs that you can even plug a guitar into. Fifth, SoundPad volumes. On the RØDECaster PRO II, the only way to adjust the playback volume of a SmartPad is with the fader, while on the Mixcast 4, you can regulate the volume individually And best of all, you can do it live while recording. The user interface for it is also very well thought out and intuitive. Well done there. This is again a quality of life improvement for those who regularly use SoundPads. So, there you have it. While it wasn't a full review, I wanted to focus on the points where they either differ or have chosen a different way to solve essentially the same thing. Of course, both the RØDECaster PRO II and the TASCAM Mixcast 4 can record to an SD card at the press of a button. They both have marker function, they have multi-track recording over USB, either pre or post fader, but in my view I have touched upon the major areas that would be a factor to make a decision whether you want to spend the extra $150 or $200 on the RØDECaster PRO II versus the Mixcast 4. As I have started with, the RØDECaster PRO II is empirically the better, more flexible, more versatile console, which can do things that the TASCAM Mixcast 4 will never be able to due to hardware limitations like the 2 USB ports, sporting 3 native plug-and-play USB channels. But you also have these attributes for the Mixcast 4 on the analog input-output side. It has a dedicated line-in and line-out port, which the RØDECaster PRO II will never have. At the same time, everything else the Mixcast 4 is currently better at can be solved by software updates on the RØDECaster PRO II side, like fine-tuning ducking, on-the-fly SoundPad volume adjustments, renaming recordings on the device, or an additional SoundPad bank, which is not the case for the Mixcast 4, as for example, the channels are fixed and you most likely won't be able to move them around to your heart's desire as you can on the RØDECaster PRO II. And of course, there are the exportable shows, the individual mic presets, and the custom routing on the RØDECaster PRO II, which are absolutely amazing features that I'm not sure the processing power of the Mixcast 4 would be able to handle it in a firmware update. At the end, it all comes down to whether or not you need all this versatility, including MIDI capabilities, plus if the relatively smaller but important differences on things that both devices have, like voice processing effects or Talkback, that are arguably better solved on the RØDECaster PRO II, are worth the extra money for you. Or if the Mixcast 4 can serve all your needs forever with its rather nice touches on fine-tuning ducking or adjusting SoundPad volumes on the fly, which you currently don't have on the RØDECaster PRO II. If this comparison was of value to you, like for deciding which one to pick up on Black Friday, it would tremendously help the channel if you would use the affiliate links listed below. On the other hand, consider subscribing if you want to go more deep into how different functions work on these devices. I actually have a playlist about both. Check them out. I hope you liked this quick comparison though too. And with that, thanks for watching and bye for now.